In this episode, Jack and Mark recount the little-known story about a circus started by a dry cleaner called Joe.
Okay, Jack, I understand you've done quite a bit of research on the subject of circuses.
Some of the best memories I have is from running away from home and hiding out in the gorilla cage when I was a child.
Bobo the gorilla?
I was adopted by Bobo.
I had heard that he mistook you for a banana.
Yeah, well, that's because when I ran away from home, it was Halloween, and I was dressed up like a banana. That's how I got in the cage so easy, and they didn't hurt me. Once they peeled me, though, I had to leave because Bobo was quite disappointed that I wasn't consumable.
Bananas are normally much, much smaller than little boys. Were you dressed as a single banana or a bunch of bananas?
Oh, no, I was just one single banana.
The guy who let you in must have been pretty stupid.
He just thought I was a kid coming to see the circus. It's just that I was able to slip between the bars. It was quite an adventure, and ever since then, I've had a great love of circuses.
Well, that would have been a traumatic incident. Like, did he grab your ears and try to rip you apart that way?
No, I just ripped my costume off, and then I just started peeling bananas. Bananas that were in there, I peeled the bananas for Bobo. He was quite grateful. He thought I was like his little servant.
You ran into quite a number of characters during your escapades at the circus.
I did join a very little-known circus. I mean, the more known circuses are Barnum & Bailey. They had elephants and stuff, but this one, it was started up by Joe's Dry Cleaning. He had a few characters. One was called, what was it? It was...
Flagellum.
Oh, that's the person who made big sculptures out of Jell-O. Yeah, and he would actually be inside the Jell-O. And it was, see the amazing man inside Jell-O. How does he breathe? Why is he still alive?
Well, he would have to eat his way out.
That was the grand finale. And he'd eat his way out and then frighten the children. He was in the scary part of the circus, yeah. And then there was Zelda, the amazing cleaner of things. Go in and they have a really dirty oven in and she would clean it. Actually, that didn't last too long. People started getting pissed off and they wanted their money back.
Well, I heard it was a bit of a scam. She didn't clean the oven. She would put the curtain down, then they'd switch a dirty oven with a new clean oven.
That's true. I mean, and she even had a sponsorship with
Mr. Clean.
Yeah, and they were pissed off because then it made them look bad.
You actually met Mr. Clean, I heard.
He looks just like Mr. Clean, and he was always dressed in white, and he didn't really do too much. I mean, he stood around with his arms crossed, and you kind of go, well, is there anything you do? I mean, what do you do at this circus? And he said, well, I sell cleansers. And he was just a salesman, really.
He was like a fish out of water.
That didn't do any good for the circus. And then there was Brutus, the grand guy. You go into the little curtain tent, and there he would be, and he'd just come out and brag about himself. And he said, I'm a grand fellow. You should have seen the porch I built. I built it with my bare hands. I didn't have a hammer. I nailed them in with my bare fists. Everyone wanted to see that. They said, hammer and nail with your fist. Hammer and nail with your fist. And he said, no, I'm going to saw some wood with a saw.
Yeah, but he used the calluses on the bottom side of his pinky finger.
Yeah, well, that was impressive. He did manage to do that. And that kept him employed for a while, actually. Sawing, but how far can you get with just sawing a plank of wood with a serrated callus on the edge of your hand?
Wasn't there a Shanko, the sword swallower?
He was quite astonishing because he not only would swallow a sword, but it would come right out his ass into a plank of wood.
He would use the sword to saw a plank of wood that was beneath his ass.
Well, it would stick right into the plank of wood. And I don't know how the trick went or if it actually went down his intestine or not, but it looked real and it caused quite a shocking disturbance.
Well, your intestine's all wavy and it goes on a circuitous path.
Well, that's it. Exactly it. That's the magic trick. People were quite impressed by it. Of course, for these tricks, there was an age limit. You couldn't be more than 6.
Because it's easy for them to suspend disbelief.
It doesn't take much to, get a wide-eyed 6-year-old looking at something. It was called the Kids Circus, really, because they couldn't trick the adults.
Now, didn't they have Frank, the bearded man?
He had a beard that literally grew out of his chest, from the top of his head and under his arms. His face was completely bare. He couldn't actually grow a beard on his face, apparently. But then, of course, it was also discovered when he was just wearing a lot of mink fur glued to his body.
People were able to witness the beard actually growing. I think he just stood behind a gorilla, and the gorilla would kind of reach his arms around, and a whole pack of minks. There was big mink cages behind him, and they would kind of scurry around.
That lasted for a little while, except he kept getting bit, and the gorilla kept squeezing him too tight. That trick didn't work out all that well. But, they were all 6-year-olds, and then the minks got loose, and then the gorilla started chasing the minks. Kids started screaming, and it was fantastic. Then it became the favorite, come get chased by minks in a gorilla tent. They had to wear special suits made of inner tubes They put those on the kids. And then that became quite popular with the adults who would then sit in the stands and look down into the pit of all these kids running around with inner tubes and minks chasing them. And they would fall down and roll around. And then the gorilla would leap in and toss the children up into the air into the audience of adults. And then they would have to sort out whose kid was which and who belonged to what. And then that would be the end of the show.
But what I don't understand about that is how an inner tube prevents you from being bitten by minks, because an inner tube goes around your waist, whereas the minks are going to bite at your feet.
They had a dentist come in and put tooth guards on them. Dentist didn't fare too well installing them, but it did protect the children for a little while. What circus is complete without some animals?
No circus is complete without some animal.
Because it was Joe's Cleaners, he was still running his dry cleaning business and financing this whole thing. Actually, he mortgaged his house and he was completely broke. And so he couldn't afford any elephants or lions. He would just get other animals and dress them up. He had a St. Bernard he dressed up as a bear. That kind of made some sense. He just put this bear costume on to the dog. And then there was, the elephant. Well, that was just an old truck he bought. And he just put this big elephant costume on the truck and drove it around the ring. People got suspicious with all the exhaust.
He had these two big pieces of paper for the ears.
Yeah, they were the mud flaps he had there.
The mud flaps. Didn't he take a dog and kind of stick a post that was very tall and stick a head on top of that post, and that was the giraffe?
Oh, yes, the great giraffe. What are they called, those dogs with the little thin heads?
Dachshunds?
He tried the Dachshund first for a giraffe, but his body was so low and the legs were so low, and then he put stilts on the legs, and then he put a big long tube for the head. This little Dachshund had to walk around on stilts with this big head on it. It kept falling over on its side, unfortunately. Then he thought the dog has to be wider. So then he tied two Dachshunds together, side by side. But then they had 6 legs.
Like a 3-legged race.
But the kids loved it because they'd never seen a giraffe.
They couldn't call him on it.
No. And these kids would go back to school and the teacher would say, let's draw animals. They always tell which kids had gone to the circus because they drew elephants with big mud flaps and exhaust coming out, and giraffes with these 6 legs and 2 little floppy ears coming out each side of the neck of the giraffe. And the teacher would say, what are those little things? She'd say, well, those are the ears.
Didn't he try to simulate a giraffe giving birth?
Yeah, that was Watch the Giraffe Give Birth trick. He picked that up from an old book in ancient China. We used to entertain the emperor of the day with that. And of course, the emperor never saw a giraffe either. But he wanted to see a giraffe, and so his followers would have to produce a giraffe. And they said, we can't go all the way to Africa and get him a giraffe by tomorrow. So they would dress it up, get a dog, and I think they used a chow chow. So then it had a really small central body. But the birthing thing got out of hand a bit because Joe's Cleaners, he was able to get a bunch of piglets. He had them all popping out. Then the kids thought that baby giraffes looked like pigs.
What would he do with those piglets?
He gave those away as prizes, and he would have these kids go down this really big slide, like a ramp would curve up at the end, and the child would fly through the air and land into a big bucket of popcorn. The kids loved that one. There was no parents allowed at the circus. They kind of get concerned for the child's safety.
They're going down this sliding ramp.
And someone throwing piglets at it as the kid goes down.
And it wouldn't just be 1 or 2 piglets. He'd throw about 50 at a time because he wanted every kid to get a prize.
Yeah, he wanted everyone to be happy.
Now, what about kangaroos?
He had to put springs on the hind legs of a Doberman Pinscher and then put a big pocket on the front. And then he had to put a fake tail on the back there and got a kangaroo.
But it's the wrong color.
He just had the top part of a pair of jeans around the bottom, the pocket twisted to the front. The dog would get upset and start barking.
But the dog would display his upsetness by bouncing around. He wanted the dog to be upset.
And he also had lots of dog kibble treats hanging from string just about 3 feet above him. So the dog would always be leaping, trying to get those. This was quite spectacular.
Didn't he have a Stinko the Clowno?
It's a sad story, Stinko the Clowno, because he could produce enormous amounts of methane. The thing was, he loved cabbage rolls, and he just wouldn't stop eating them. And he lived on cabbage rolls. He produced all this methane, and then he would put himself in a cannon. It was a big cannon, and you would hear him just passing gas and farting away, and they put microphones in there to make it sound even louder. And of course, what kid doesn't love the sound of a fart? They're all cheering, and they always knew that after about 20 farts of Stinko the Clown's methane, they just had to light a fuse on the can, and it just blew him right out of there.
Right. I mean, the Callan had no explosive itself.
It was just his methane, and he just blew across the room, and it produced an incredible stink, even too harsh for the kids, and it would cause pandemonium, and everyone would be screaming, but they would always be laughing at the same time, because what kid doesn't love a stinky fart?
No kid doesn't love a stinky fart.
They all love it. They hate it and they love it at the same time.
Didn't he have a tightrope walker show?
He had a donkey who could walk across a tightrope. That was the main star attraction of the whole show, was Petunia the donkey.
In the center ring.
Center ring, yeah. To watch this donkey go across a tightrope.
It was only an inch above the ground.
Well, yeah, it was an inch above the ground, and it was a plank about 3 feet wide.
There was nothing tight about it.
It was painted to look like a rope if you saw it at the edge.
It was more of a tight plank.
And they didn't let anyone sit at an angle. All the seats were strategically placed so that you could only see the plank from the side. And then it looked like a rope. This was their big cash-making thing, was Petunia the tightrope walking donkey. If it was ever uncovered that it was actually a 3-foot wide plank, it would be ruined. So when the kids came in, they strapped them into the seats so they couldn't stand up and look.
Didn't they give them special 2D glasses?
Oh, yes, the 2D glasses. Oh, the kids thought that was great because they were free. What kid doesn't love free 2D glasses?
No kid.
So they all got their 2D glasses, they're strapped into their seat, and then out comes Petunia, the tightrope walking donkey, 3 feet off the ground, and it looks like she's walking on a tightrope.
Well, they just painted the ground to look like it was a big hole.
And below, it looked deeper than it was, but then they put little dorsal fins on piglets, and it looked like there were a bunch of sharks whirling around it. Oh, there's all baby sharks in the pit. If Petunia falls, they'll get eaten.
They were small sharks.
They said that they were just little children sharks, and they were all just 6 years old. You can tell a kid anything, right?
No.
They don't know. So they put dorsal fins on piglet. One time, the piglets had all escaped, and they had to put dorsal fins on chickens. And then they started flying out of the hole with their dorsal fins.
Chickens can't fly.
They can flutter up in the air. And then they were landing on the kids, and the kids were with their 2D glasses strapped in the seats. They thought they were getting attacked by sharks. It was pandemonium. But what kid doesn't love pandemonium?
No kid doesn't like pandemonium.
That's right. So even that was a success.
Didn't he have a high dive act?
Yes, the high dive act. Oh, that was good. For the high dive act, he had a obese pigeon. Well, I mean, he couldn't fly, but actually put a little lead vest on it so then it would jump off and it would just go right straight down into a pile of bird seed.
If you didn't put anything he could eat, he wouldn't do it, right?
No, and that's how you got him to be overweight. Even the kids got sick of that. They just called it the fat pigeon ripoff. He had to get something else to do the high jump.
Didn't he make a balloon animal to do the high dive? And he put a rock on the bottom of it?
He was desperate. He was so low on cash at that point. He was bankrupt. His wife kept on saying, "What's wrong with you? These kids are going to rebel. You can't pull anything over them." And Joe the cleaner said, 6-year-old kids, they like everything. I could throw a rock off the top of that high diving board and tell them it's
a small man.
It's a small round man, and they're going to believe me. And then, in fact, he even tried to do that. He painted a face on it and put an extension on it with some scaffolding and threw that off. Kids loved it because it smashed to pieces at the bottom. But then they did start to rebel. They started taking their seatbelts off and throwing their 2D glasses into the ring. And finally, Joe the cleaner had to jump off himself.
You know those inflatable clowns that you punch and they come back up? I thought he used one of those for a little while. And he called it Stinko.
Yeah, he did. He dropped the inflatable clown down into a tub, and it landed on this thing and created a spark, and it blew the whole thing up because the clown was filled with methane gas. I thought, well, what kid doesn't love an exploding clown?
No kid doesn't like an exploding clown.
Then he said, come and punch the clown. He had Stinko the clown fill all these inflatable clowns with his methane gas. And then all the kids would be given big boxing gloves with matches. And then they would go punch the clowns. The gloves had little pointed studs on them. And the clown would burst and it would release the methane. And then
it would create like a balloon. You know, when a balloon lets out the air, it goes all over the place. That would happen to the clowns, except it was methane gas. It was on fire. And it would leave a trail of fire.
Yeah. For the ignition of the methane, they had Carlos, the amazing chain-smoking cigarette man, and they had him sitting over off to the side. His whole thing was that he'd smoke cigarettes constantly.
That was Joe's brother, wasn't it? He was a chain smoker, and he was out of work.
He was never the same after he got caught in a pant press.